Okay, hello everyone. My name is Surojit. I'm a graduate student at the English department at UCSB, who I'm working on mostly the environmental humanities, media studies, and postcolonial studies broadly. But I'm also a graduate fellow at the Orphelia Center and the future infrastructure cluster of the Orphelia Center. This is sort of part of a conversation that we are organizing as part of our cluster's work. And I am joined today by one of my students, and we'll talk more about her introduction with with her name is Sasha Senal, who is actually was part of my student for the class on deserts, islands, and other energy infrastructures, which is kind of the topic of our conversation today. I'll say a little bit before we let Sasha introduce herself, uh, a little bit about the class. So so we started. We taught. I taught this class with my fellow graduate fellow graduate fellow, basically, from at the Future Infrastructure Cluster, Stephen Borunda, uh, on the topic of deserts, islands, and other energy infrastructures. Uh, we sort of conceived of this class based on our former work for the Orphelia Center, and the class was on built on the shoulders of our work for the center, which was conceived and supported by the College of Creative Studies at UCSB, and was finally taught last year for the spring quarter. The class was part of a Crossroads Fellowship, which is sort of a yearly fellowship that is run by the College of Creative Studies, which helps students develop class on environmental humanities, as well as on topics on social justice, to speak broadly. Stephen and I conceived of this class on energy infrastructures, which is a common theme and topic, research interest in both of our works, and we are very happy and very excited to be teaching it in the creative studies department. Uh, just briefly, on the class a little bit. So the class was imagined as a very creative and interdisciplinary class on the topic of energy infrastructures. But broadly, we were investigating how energy systems or large scale energy infrastructures interact with environmental realities across different global spaces. That's how we conceived it. We sort of divided it into three major sections. We started with a larger topic on the top on extraction. Then we had a middle section on the distribution, and the final section on futures. So these are some of our keywords through which we are looking at energy infrastructures. Uh, Finally, the class was sort of integrating methodologies and approaches from uh, creative studies. A lot of collaborative work was involved, and a lot of plenty of global studies. So these are some of our approaches that informed the class. What we have we are today is we're sort of going as a sort of follow-up conversation to the class with one of our students, Sasha, who will be speaking with us on her experiences, as well as some of the wonderful work that she did for the class, uh, as part of our sort of assignments, as well as a lot of the lot of work was sort of volunteer as well. So Sasha, thanks so much for joining us today. Would you like to sort of introduce yourself and say a few words about, say, who you are, where you are from, what you are doing currently at UCSB?
Hi, my name is Sasha Senal. I am an undergraduate student of writing and literature in the College of Creative Studies. I'm also the current editor-in-chief of Spectrum Literary Journal, a publication that is run out of the College of Creative Studies. And I have a lot of interests. I'm a poet. I love environmental studies and Black studies, discussing. I love discussing energy and environmental justice and infrastructure. That's something that drew me to this class originally. And yeah, I think that the work that I like to make is definitely interdisciplinary. And that's where I think I fit into the class and what I had to offer.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sasha. Yeah, we were very much grateful to have you there along with many others. And the class was, like you said, could not have been more interdisciplinary than uh, I have seen in general. So yeah, we'll get to the discussion straight away. But before we do, I would actually love to sort of share my screen and give people a little bit of overview. I should have done this when I was actually introducing the class, a little bit about just the syllabus page of the class and what it was about. So this was the first page of our syllabus. It's uploaded on the Orphelia Center cluster website. Feel free to take a look if you are interested. There's a lot more. It's really more than 10 pages. But yeah, that's it. Okay, so just to get started, Sasha, uh, before we get into a little bit more on the specifics, would you like to sort of share a little bit about your sort of overall impression of the class, particularly, for example, sort of what drew you into the class? Like, what are sort of your initial interests? Maybe some parts of your favorite parts of the class aspects, things that you like, things that you maybe did not like as well, and maybe some of your major learnings, things that you thought were very useful to you as a creative and critical researcher from based on this class.
Um, when I initially signed up for this class, there was another class that was contending for this same spot in my schedule. And the thing that made me choose this class in particular was the way that it engaged with both like colonial superstructures as well as these things related to our environment and incorporating a lens that is both scientific and humanities together. That just was super profound to me, and I wanted to explore that more. And can you repeat one of your questions?
Yeah, sure. I'll remind you the points. So yeah, the initial interest definitely, but also sort of things that you enjoyed as part of the class, maybe like sort of your favorite bits from the class. I can remember we did so many we tried so many different things as part of the class. So things that you probably liked as part of our like activities, maybe readings, and some of your major learnings maybe at the end of the class. Now that we have had a little bit of time to process from the end of the class.
Well, I particularly enjoyed the breadth of work that we were looking at, from dams to electricity,
Hmm.
engaging with, well, dams and electricity, but also um, solar power, lithium itself, just engaging with all these different materials and different environments, as well as these different mediums through which this information can be conveyed, looking at
Hmm.
poetry, looking at literature, looking at these intense articles and news even. Um, that was I just really enjoyed looking at all of those texts together and hearing everyone's perspective, and and everyone in the class being from these different
Backgrounds.
disciplines,
Yeah.
chemistry and poli sci, and me with
Hmm.
literature, someone else with film. It was just a super kind of eclectic conversation that we were engaging with. And I I just particularly enjoyed some of the literature that we had to engage with.
Hmm.
That was something that really stood out to me, and I um,
And yeah, the I think I'll just add on to you a little bit. I know you are kind of the center, but I just keep feeling that I was also sort of a, even though I was formally an instructor, but I feel like where we managed to create a sort of environment where Stephen and I also felt sometimes as learning a lot through the process. So it was definitely a lot of collaborative exploration with our students. And one of our big part was actually the film screenings as well. And Stephen, obviously being a film scholar, like I remember we spending hours and hours of time trying to decide how many films to show, and which to like how to sort of fit into the schedule, simply because we had so much of film and other materials on the syllabus when we were planning about it, and we really had to sort of cut down the number of films because they do take time, and we are not that much fond of asking people to watch the films just on their own, but we also wanted to integrate some films to watch in class, which I personally really enjoyed, some of a couple of film viewing experiences together, but we just could not fit them in because there were so many of them.
Going back to something that you said, I definitely felt like there was a kind of a breakdown of conventional learning hierarchies.
Mm-hmm.
Like the group felt very fluid in the learning experience,
Right.
and it was also such a unique experience to be taught by both you and Stephen, because I'm kind of used to this idea of a teacher, of a professor, of us
Yeah.
all facing this one way and only one of you facing this way. And
Right.
I really enjoyed the breakdown of that structure. Um, yeah, that
Right.
was
Yeah.
very wonderful. As well as the project based learning. I think that
Uh-huh.
that is also super kind of a revolutionary strategy.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, I think we are also helped by the fact that we are teaching at CCS, like College of Creative Studies, which really allowed us to be sort of adventurous in that regard, and sort of really encourage students to think creatively about their projects and final assignments, rather than doing tried and tested analytical and research based work. Not that it's not valuable, but as we try to explore, is that you can do creative work which are also research based, right? I think there is, it's sort of a commonplace understanding that research based work has to take the output of the academic essay, but I think, as your work demonstrated so well, that you can actually have very good research and also very much creative outputs to communicate your research. So that was really allowed us the CCS infrastructure and the CCS system, and obviously the students took it so well that it went pretty good in that way. And finally, just on this topic, would you like to share any particular learnings out of the class that might have like stayed with you? It could be like conceptually, it could be in terms of outlook, in terms of insight into the world, or the world of, let's say, the environments, the world of infrastructure, so things like that.
I think through my college education, I've kind of been touching on this thing that I'm about to say, but really, like in this class, I just felt so strongly that with anything that seems to appear normal
Mm-hmm.
and occurring naturally, like there is always space for criticism of it. You know, looking at energy was a
Right.
concept that was
Right.
major to the class, and like just looking at the meaning of the word itself, energy, some people might automatically go to the things that powers our electricity and whatnot, but energy is also the human labor that extracts
Right.
the resources that makes the lights turn on, essentially.
Absolutely.
um, and so basically just it further highlighted this class further highlighted the way that all of these things are super connected, have multiple definitions attached to them, multiple meanings, and everything can be criticized.
Right. So that's wonderful. Thanks so much. So let's get to a little bit. I have one more sort of a bit more specific question to some extent. So obviously, as with any class, a fair bit of it was like readings, like our reading, different types of readings that we had. So I'd love to hear if you can share a little bit about what are some of your favorite texts, maybe like choose one, like, because we had a nice mix of creative texts and and a bit of like sort of more critical, analytical text as well. Like if you had to choose one from each category, which ones you might choose there?
Well, I'm a huge fan of Invisible Man by Ralph
Uh-huh.
Ellison. I
Okay.
had read it before this class,
Yeah.
and I didn't skimp out on doing the work. I read it all again for
That's
the
enough.
class. And
Yeah, like I cannot be more grateful for that because it was a fairly long novel, and we were reading it towards the end of the quarter. Definitely in the second half. Uh, but yeah, thanks so much. Thank you so much for going through that. Definitely. But yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
it was certainly an undertaking, but yes, I hadn't really considered when I had read it the first time a few years prior just how much the language of energy
Hmm.
is infused within that book, the energy of a movement, even like a movement itself, the word movement, like
Right.
just looking at that, and also the light and the dark, and lightness being always equated with empowerment. The word empowerment itself, the word
Power.
power, and the
Yeah,
way that is
absolutely.
associated with electricity, but also, these superstructures that are, you know, organizing everything about our lives.
Yeah.
And then, yeah,
And
Invisible Man is also just so like such a profound book in itself and is
right.
super important in general.
No, thank you so much for mentioning it. I would also sort of give a shout out to my friend and sort of one of my senior at the English department, Sage Gerson, whose writings on Invisible Man from the point of view of energy humanities was sort of our inspiration for including it into the class. And we read a piece of her writing as well there. So shout out to Sage, uh, who is in uh, Rhode Island School of Design currently as an assistant professor. Thanks so much for showing us a new way to read Invisible Man, actually.
It
But
was a very enlightening text, and
yeah,
yeah, that's a
yeah,
pun,
yeah,
unfortunately.
you can see how much it's impossible to get away from the energy rhetoric, right? How much it
Yes.
actually infiltrates our ordinary language from all different sides. But also, just to get back a little bit, if you had to choose one of the critical texts, which one you think you might have chosen?
I was really moved by bikinis and other specific notions. That text kind of completely
Hmm.
informed my project at the end of this class. Not completely, but like it was so moving to me. And just this discussion of the United States government conducting nuclear research in the Marshall Islands, so incredibly disturbing and enraging. And
Right,
I think I did my project on this topic because I just felt so moved to do so, like having to mobilize in some fashion. And I think that this, you know, I'm not a graduate student yet. I'm not a PhD student yet, but I think that this topic,
right,
the dispossession and the damage that has been done to these various peoples doesn't get enough like doesn't get enough infographic airtime at
right.
minimum. And
Recognition, yes, simple.
I
Mm.
just wanted to shed some light on that.
Yeah. No, yeah, thanks so much. We'll come to your project soon again. And but could you just repeat the name of the text once more, just for everybody to hear properly? Was it the Elizabeth Delory text?
It was the Teresia K.
Tell you what.
Tiaiua,
Uh-huh.
and it's bikinis and other specific notions, but it's S
Yeah.
slash Pacific N slash oceans.
Yes. Thank you so much. Yes, he is actually very much well known in the environmental and post-colonial studies angle, and her work is wonderful. Uh, okay, so let's just move on a little bit. So I just wanted to walk us through a little bit, probably through some of the wonderful work that you did. And for the midterm, we had an, an assignment which we called Energy Infrastructure Starter Kits. Is shout out to my professor Alan Liu, from whom this form of the assignment was sort of inspired, from whose assignment, starter kit assignments, and so, which was basically about creating a sort of kit of different tools, different texts, different materials to learn about a particular energy history, or an energy system, or an energy story, basically. And I'll just quickly open uh, Sasha's midterm uh, page. Just a second. So you had a midterm on the history of rubber media, right? Do you want to say a few words about sort of how you came to do this project? Like, sort of what was the inspiration behind, and how you carried out the research, and how you sort of decided on the final form of it?
I remember that I really wanted to talk about plantations of
Mm-hmm.
some kind, or at least start there and then go on this journey. And I have had a particular interest in exploring Southeast Asia. I've been to
Mm-hmm.
Vietnam and Cambodia, and I'm also fascinated by the Vietnam War. And so I guess rubber plantations
Mm-hmm.
were just of a particular fascination to me, and I wanted to look into them more. And so I started with looking at the definition of rubber trees and then the rubber plantation itself, looking at postcards. And I wanted to focus on media in
Right,
itself,
right,
not just the actual fact that these things happened and are happening, but the way that these circumstances are produced into a media a mediated artifact
right,
and then distributed, and the various interpretations that can be derived from these artifacts and the implications on society at large from interacting with these artifacts. And ultimately, my project ends with the way that rubber is polluting the environment.
mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's a long journey from a colonial legacy to still, in a sense, a colonial legacy, if the people who are colonized experience the brunt of the environmental destruction and repercussions, which they do.
Right, absolutely. Thank you so much. So you had definitely a various, plenty of different objects, right, that you found out. So, do you want to say a little bit like where you looked for them, like what kind of research you did, it, and how you sort of decided to choose them?
Yes. Well, I kind of wanted to make it a sequential journey, not really chronological,
Okay,
even though there are some aspects of it that are sort of chronological. Um, so we start with a definition, and I think that that was kind of a natural starting point for me,
right.
because just kind of looking at what should be the objective idea of
Understand. Yeah,
something and seeing how even that um, can reveal something about our interpretations of how this object moves through the world. And one of my favorite artifacts, some of my favorite artifacts are the postcard, which I think comes after the definition, because postcards, as we discussed extensively in the
right,
class, um, really emphasize this point that I'm trying to make, that this is something in which people communicate about the minutia of their lives or things
right,
that they're experiencing, but it can really be mediated by the most horrific things. I mean, in this country, there used to be images of lynching put on postcards, and that's incredibly disturbing history. And um, so, yes, postcards something that seems so benign can have
Yeah.
such a malignant thing attached to it, and distribute the most malignant ideas. And another one of my most favorite artifacts that I put in this project is the I believe it was a Ford poster from the 50s,
Mm-hmm.
which kind of defines
Is it this one?
American
Yeah.
citizenship. Yes,
Yeah.
American citizenship through
Right.
this very capitalistic, heteronormative, um, yeah,
Yeah.
consumerist lens. If you don't have tires, if you don't use rubber, if you don't have this object, you're not participating in what we're trying to build as an American
Yeah.
society, and that was just so fascinating to me.
Right. Right, absolutely. Thank you so much. And yeah, yeah, you obviously did excellent work. And of course, we cannot talk about energy without talking about the automobile industry, right? And the sort of central role it has played in the world history of energy. And Ford definitely is kind of the central to that central role historically has played. I'm glad that you mentioned about the postcards. They're definitely one of my favorite sort of objects as well, among things that we have explored in the class. I remember being sort of really fascinated by this postcard that we had in our course syllabus as well, which is like the picture of the open source coal mine in China, uh, which was such a wonderful article. I think we found it from the work of Victor Siu on carbon technocracy. And it's such a fascinating object, postcards, which sort of really capture the ethos of the time in of a nation in many ways. Is And also simultaneously postcards also become sort of a nice symbol of movement, right? Of uh, transportation from one place to another place. So, what could be a better symbol of global mobility than a postcard, right? And also simultaneously a mode of representation. So, in that sense, it's been fascinating. I'm really glad that you were able to sort of discover these objects as part of the starter kit, which worked beautifully. Okay, thanks so much. So let's moving on a little bit. I just wanted to touch upon maybe briefly a little bit on one of the assignments that we had planned, and but probably it did not go as well as we thought, but to some extent definitely was useful. Is the living document, right? We had a sort of a running journal theme, sort of a small assignment in the class where we basically assigned a couple of students to reflect on some of the key concepts of the class, right? As a sort of journal entries by reflecting on the uh, topic week by week. Uh, and the three major concepts were energy in the first place, the infrastructure in the second, and the topic of environmental justice, which I believe you worked on with another student, Nair. So I'm just curious, what do you feel about that assignment? Our sort of goal initially was uh, to give that as a way for students to work a little bit together, rather than doing just individually, so that creating a sort of a platform for working in tandem with somebody. And collaboration definitely was a sort of a key word for us when we were thinking about the class in terms of sort of our approach, in terms of our pedagogical strategies as well. So this journal assignment was sort of designed as part of that, and we thought that okay, this could potentially be a good way to record our sort of evolving understanding of these key concepts of the class, as well as could potentially serve as a good resource for other students who might be interested in that concept. So you worked on the concept of environmental justice. If I can pull that up quickly. Uh, so what do you feel about your work on this topic, and the concept? So how do you feel that your ideas on the topic on environmental justice, but also maybe the other two journal issue topics, which was energy and infrastructure, has probably evolved as part of the class. So has there been any sort of development on how you thought about energy, infrastructure, and environmental justice before the start of the class and at the end of it as part of through this assignment?
Yes, I think that through doing this project and experiencing the class and considering all three words, week to week, it became extremely evident just the way the kind of multiple meanings, perhaps fluidity within
Mm-hmm.
each of these words, like environmental justice, one might think about, just activism. But
Right,
that's not really what we did talk about activism, but I think we were getting at something much deeper. Um, Environmental justice, environmental injustice, and
right,
how these things are executed with energy, with infrastructure through these things.
right,
And like you, I think, like I said earlier about energy, energy isn't just one thing either. It's not just the things that, flow through our light fixtures. It's labor, it's movement, it's resources, it's extraction, infrastructure isn't just the things that the tools that, or it's not just the construction of our hospitals and schools and roads and houses and whatnot. It's like the superstructures that organize those things. I keep saying that word, but it's so relevant, I think.
right,
The structuring structures.
right,
um, so, yes, just recognizing the ways that everything is so complex. And that
right.
seems really simplistic, but truly that is the work that I think we were doing on these documents, reckoning with that. And sometimes I did have
Mm-hmm.
energy to
Mm-hmm.
make like a really fully formed argument about the topics that we were encountering on a particular week. But other times I sort of ranted on this document, and I
Mm-hmm.
think that there's definitely space for that.
Right,
And maybe, I don't know if, I think that one of the beautiful things about having such an interdisciplinary class is that there is room to turn these rants into something that is analytical and is art and is um, full,
right,
complete.
right. Thanks so much. Yeah, that's definitely is something that we have in mind, had in mind when constructing these, that on week by week basis, we can just sort of record our immediate reflections on the concepts. But at the end of it, when we compile them together, it's almost always the case that something insightful emerges. So it's just as a nice way of tracking our progresses. I think what happened uh, is we definitely ended up with less number of students than we had initially hoped, and that worked out well at many cases. At other instances, in many cases, it definitely allowed us a lot more engaging discussion, lot more participation from the students. But this assignment, we sort of had in mind that maybe 3 4 people would participate per document, which ended up with just 2 people. So the collaboration aspect kind of diminished a little bit, but it also definitely uh, allowed a platform or avenue to sort of track our progress a little bit of how we are thinking about this concept at the beginning and how it's sort of changing with the passing of with the influence of each reading every week. So that was sort of the agenda behind it. And I think we did a pretty good job. If somebody reads through the documents, there's definitely a clear sign of how the notion has evolved. Like you mentioned, environmental justice is, which is not just activism. So activism is probably just one mode of working for justice, right? So as is creative work, as is journalistic work, as is artist work, which can all be different modes of enacting and working for environmental justice, right? Right. Okay, so thanks so much. So we'll sort of move into a second part of the project of the conversation, which would roughly comprise Sasha's work for the final project, and particularly her creative and poetic works there. Uh, so if the first part was sort of the rest of the class, and the second part we probably would take a little more time in going over her poetry that she produced as part of the final project. I will briefly introduce the final project work that we had as part of the class. So the final project was basically designed for the students to be as creative as they want. That's how we sort of designed it. We had very little format specific instruction. We sort of gave a free license to students, requiring basically two broad aspects: is that there has to be a significant amount of research involved, and some form of creativity involved in communicating that research, right? So that was sort of our broad guidelines. And all the students did wonderfully well in exploring various different platforms. So there were different ways, from poetic explorations uh, to blog writing to I think interactive storytelling, to I think Ben did something really interesting as well. I forgot exactly what it was.
There was a photo essay that was
Yes, it was
particularly
photo
interesting.
essay. So there has been like various range of creative works by all the students. But Sasha, who did a poetry anthology, which was really daunting in the sense that it was not just a couple of poems. He wrote 7 different poems, all of which were influenced heavily by research, and which were experimental, as well as she wrote context and background for each of the poems, and she recorded herself as well, to give us an audio version of the poems as well. So that was wonderful work. So in this section, what we're going to do is, Sasha, is we'll take some time to maybe ask you to probably uh, give a little bit of overview of the final project as a whole first. It's about sort of your inspirations, the broad topic, uh, and the choice of the medium of poetry. And then we will sort of get maybe ask you to read aloud a few poems, and sort of talk about them a little bit, or probably reverse, maybe introduce a poem, talk about it a little bit, about the research involved, what it is about, the background, the topic, and then probably read that aloud uh, for a few poems, hopefully. So, would you like to say a few things about the project as a whole, about how you started, why you chose this medium, why you chose a particular topic, and what sort of choices you made?
Yes. So there were a fair few readings about related to nuclearity in the Pacific Islands, and as I said earlier, I was particularly struck by these and just how horrendous that whole event was and continues to be. And around that unit, we watched a reading of not just a reading, a whole beautiful video of Kathy Jetnil Kitchener, a
Mm-hmm.
Marshallese poet, reading one of her poems on this horrendous concrete dome that contains nuclear waste on one of the islands. And that was just such a beautiful piece of work and highly inspirational to the work that I wanted to create for this project. And I I at first started with fiction, but that's not really my. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't really working out, and so I just decided that I will stick to what I know and save my experimentation for later. Um, and I came out with these poems, and the research really came easy because it was
Mm-hmm.
something that I was just so interested
Right.
in, and I felt I could really sink my teeth into it. And so, accompanying my poems are some small paragraphs, just briefly touching on, nothing too extensive, but briefly touching on my the research that I did and the various references in certain poems and what I was trying to go for. Um,
Right. So just before we get started with the poems, individual poems, basically, eh, I just wanted to ask you, you from my experience in terms of teaching as well as a student, it's a really it's not that really easy to convert your research into a creative form, right? So there's challenge involved in that. So you have research, and part of the reason why the research essay is such a popular form is that it's probably the most conducive form to communicate your research, right? But it's really not that easy to have a research which is information oriented, information based, and convert that into creative work, right? So would you like to say a few words with regard to some of the challenges that you had as a poet, as who is not necessarily writing free flowing poetry here, but kind of bounded by your research, right? You are trying to communicate your research in a poetic form. Was that challenging for you in any particular way, or did that come naturally to you?
There was definitely challenging. Like just having to negotiate using my own style, but also making sure that I am putting things in that I need to say, and not
Mm-hmm.
just for the project, but that are that kind of hold up the integrity of the poem itself.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
also, there was a question at certain points about whether this is really my voice, not just my style, but my voice. I wanted to be very careful about not overstepping into anyone's heritage
Right.
without consent, and
Right.
that was definitely a, a challenge as well. Just something to be considered that was important to me, and yeah, there was just a lot of components to think about, and there was definitely some moments where I felt tired. Even though the poem doesn't take up a whole page, it was still at times an exhausting process. A lot of mental energy, kind of balancing my creative mind and
Yes.
my analytical mind, but really, they're pretty interconnected most of the
Absolutely.
time. So just
Yeah.
a balancing act, but it turned out I'm happy with it.
Yeah, no, we are more than happy as well. It was wonderful. So I wanted to ask another, probably one more question before we get into the poems. Is do you want to say a few words on how you came to choose the title? There's the beautiful title of Touched Fathoms. Like, what do you mean by that? What does that uh, mean for you, and how you sort of uh, landed on it?
Well, I don't really remember my process, but if I fathoms, a nautical unit of measurement, and the fact that it's touched, like I suppose what I'm referencing is that these spots that can seem so deep and so isolated,
Hmm.
perhaps. There's a huge rhetoric with nuclearity in the Marshall Islands, a lot of rhetoric surrounding isolation, and the fact that this isolation was touched is like a way of really delicately putting the horrendous destruction that occurred in
Right.
this space that continues to be extremely sacred and but also resilient.
No, that's wonderful. No, I really found the titles to be super complex and rich in the sense in terms of meanings, because both the words touch and fathoms can be really meaningful in multiple ways, because fathom, which is definitely one unit, right, unit of measurement, but also has, from that point, from that origin, it's also become a word that means learning, right? Or like trying to know, like fathoming something, right? As we often
Yes.
use the word when we are confronted with the unknown knowledge, and that definitely is a undersea metaphor that infiltrates into our ordinary language. And at the same time, touch is such a significant word, concept, practice, and can be both delicate but also destructive at the same time. So uh, a bomb is a form of touching. in this situation, but also how touch can also become a process of revival, process of solidarity, process of regeneration, and all that. So, in that sense, it was really wonderful how you came to choose the titles.
And to be touched is also, to possibly be damaged, but also to be deeply moved by something,
Yes,
which I was also grappling it with.
yeah, absolutely. Because touch, like even if we just look into our fairy tales, like touch can damage you, but touch can also revive you, right? So uh, the duality for both of the words is wonderfully chosen. Thank you so much. So let's move on a little bit. We'll probably, so you composed this anthology with 7 poems. We'll probably read maybe three or four of them.
Yes.
So I'd leave that up to you,
Okay.
whichever poem you want to choose of your among your favorite ones, and I'll try to find that one. So do you have a particular choice for one to go first?
Why don't we start with Dear Bikini on page
Sure.
2?
Yes, so that's the first poem in the list. Do you want to say a few words on the topic of it and the research before you read through the poem, maybe?
Yes. So in 1952, the Atomic Energy Commission exploded the 15 megaton thermonuclear weapon Bravo over
Hmm.
Bikini Atoll, which left an enormous crater on this island and displaced so many
Millions.
people.
Right,
And now on Runit Island, a different island, but under similar circumstances, there is a concrete dome that covers nuclear
right,
waste, and this waste is seeping into the water as well as the earth. And people from this entire collection of islands in the Marshall Islands are still experiencing the ramifications of nuclear waste and just nuclear damage.
right,
And I kind of wanted to write to the earth itself and consider the trauma that the earth has experienced and how this trauma can be mimetic to the trauma experienced by the humans impacted by this devastation.
right. Thank you so much. So I'll hand it over to you to read through the poem once.
Okay.
Uh, before I might have a couple of one more question on it. Yeah, go ahead.
Hello?
Yeah,
Is there okay.
sorry, sorry, signal failed signal failure. But yeah,
That's
so I'll let you read through the poem uh, before I can ask another question.
okay. Um, Dear Bikini, I'm writing to ask about emptiness, a hole in which other traditions like emotions also be buried? A mass grave, a hole that holds dead and living, suspended in sleep. Not dead, just asleep, not yet emptied of animism, but struggling to go on in a world that is. And what of concrete? A belly cast for stillborn, as if containing life, it is warm, formed of dead particles or even ideology. This evil also contains signs of life, like strangers seeking to study fire as performance. Where are they now that the whole is carved, leaving you pregnant and still empty? I'm writing to ask about emptiness because emptiness is not just that thing we cannot touch. It is everything around that thing, holding space in place, shaping it, constricting it, and maybe letting it go when the infrastructure of space itself grows too heavy for even emptiness to hold.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. I really like this poem, probably among all of them, most as well. Like if you ask me, I'll ask you first. Like, uh, what's your favorite passage or line out of this whole poem? Is there any particular line or passage that you really love here?
Um, I I think grows too heavy for what is it? When the infrastructure of space itself grows too heavy for even emptiness to hold.
Right.
Um, I think that that is super cool.
Yeah,
I'm
I
really
really like that
interested.
whole of the last paragraph myself, like the entire, pretty much the entire last paragraph, particularly how you define emptiness here in the last paragraph. So, because emptiness is not just that thing we cannot touch, it is everything around that thing, holding space in place, shaping it, constricting it, and maybe letting it go when the infrastructure of space itself grows too heavy for even emptiness to hold. Yeah, as you said, like it's pretty cool, but it's also pretty deep actually. And I just really, I was really struck by some of the running themes here, which is obviously emptiness, which connects with the creator, right? The whole, in this case, the physical creator, but also you sort of add to it an ontological dimension, right? Emptiness in terms of identity, whole. I'm just curious, like, how did you make that connection, or like, how did you came to that idea probably of emptiness or whole? Is that what you are trying to explore in the poem as well, conceptually, the notion of emptiness?
Of course.
Yeah.
I'm just
Yeah.
I really I have my own sort of experiences with dispossession, but
Mhm.
I've never experienced something on this scale.
Right.
And I'm just it's so writing these poems, I was just trying to imagine like and reading, you know, things people have written and said, people from the Marshall Islands who have been displaced and are experiencing the repercussions of nuclearity, like just imagining being stripped, not stripped, but just detached, not but
Right.
like not detached. It's complicated, like having this ontological view that is so connected to the land and then having to leave it, and what do you do with the knowledge that you have, and just
Right.
I would feel so lost.
Right. No, it is wonderful. So I remember like one of the sort of challenges you might say, or uh, work that happens in like critical infrastructure studies, or like when we work with infrastructure, is obviously we tend to draw some attention to the physicality of the infrastructure, right? Which we often say that has been often overlooked in humanistic studies, which generally deals with discourse a lot, language, discourse, etc. Whereas infrastructure studies generally wants to draw attention to the physical dimension. And your this poem is like a wonderful example of balancing the two, I would say, sort of bridging the physicality of the infrastructure, in this case the crater, the bomb, which is absolutely a physical reality, but also connecting that as, or seeing that as constitutive of the ontological, right, or the discursive aspect or the identity aspect of a community. That this same whole, which is geologically physical in a very geological sense, but also highly discursive in a psychological, uh, identity and communal sense, in terms of how a community views itself, right? It's almost like a community views itself in terms of this creator almost. It almost reminds me like Jacques Lacan's like psychoanalytic theories, which actually talk about the whole, or like the lack, as constitutive of our very being. And in this case, it's not just a discursive or language oriented being, it's a very physical emptiness or creator that sort of constitutes a very identity of a people, right? Thanks so much. That's wonderful. So, if we move on, what would be your next preferred poem out of this anthology?
Do you think we have time for one or two, because it'll
We have a
depend?
couple. We can do couple, two of them at least. Which one you wanna go to first?
Let's go to um, For the Good of Mankind on page 6.
Sure.
This one
Right.
I found particularly challenging to write. Um,
Oh, and why is that?
I really had to dig in
Mm-hmm.
to this bit of history,
Mm-hmm.
and not just the history itself, like not just the facts of what happened, but like the rhetoric at the time. And there was a lot of crazy rhetoric,
Right.
conflating U.S. Military actions with the will of God. And I thought that that was such just a crazy idea, and I really was attracted to that to write about, and thinking about General military governor of the Marshall Islands, Ben Wyatt, who asked/told the people to leave their homeland so that the United States could conduct research for the good of mankind. This is something that he said.
Mm.
Um, and we know now, we knew then
Right.
that this research wreaked havoc that people are still facing the consequences of. Um,
Right. Right. Absolutely. That rhetoric of greater good is always keeps always popping up, right? In terms of
yes,
all uh, projects. So yeah. So do you want to read through it?
sure. Okay. For the good of mankind. A new temple is being built. Image of a monolith consumed by flame, an image of an image, for to see it is to die by its majesty. Even to hear it is to misunderstand the lateness of the hour, turning time towards that imperceptible slip for the good of mankind. Governor Wyatt, tell them of the new God, the old God, loving America and dying for it. Isn't the will of God also a weapon of peace? A weapon that unites us all as Americans, despite Elbridge Gerry and a Civil Rights Act 16 years of 30,000 away. That's what it takes to serve God. 30,000 years of devotion to a concrete land under which the soil murmurs of radiation, radiating heat into the polyesters of devotees now shrouded in the uniform of displacement. This, they will be told, is better than their motherland. So, for the good of mankind, pack thousands of years into wood trunks and tap the last signs of a drowning language into your skin in preparation for the next 1,000 years and the next 1,000 years, until even marrow of our bones, all of us, is radiated.
Thank you. That's wonderful. This is definitely rich in terms of like research content. Like you really had to go through a fair bit of historical research in terms of the people and the rhetoric and the discourse. And yeah, here as well, like I really love the final paragraph as well, which where I think the images of years, thousands of years into wood trunks and the last signs of a drowning language into your skin. And the skin obviously always brings me back to the notion of touch as well. And radiation obviously is a form of touching, right? In many ways.
I kept reiterating this idea of thousands of years
Mm-hmm.
because it's been proven that that's the amount of time it'll take for many of these islands to recover from the nuclear waste that
Absolutely.
from its nuclearism. Like, so not being able to return to a land for thousands of years, like what good does that do to the people and their trauma now?
Right.
Um, Especially when there are few reparations afforded to them.
Like reparation, even like I think you talk about this later. Even before reparation, there's not even an apology in most cases,
Yes,
right? Like
yes.
which is like the first step uh, towards any form of reparation.
And truly, like, what kind of reparation can be given when
Yeah,
your landscape has been
bombed
permanently
out.
altered?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And radiation itself is such an intriguing phenomena, right, in that sense, as opposed to many other forms of violence and destruction, because it can be really, it is invisible, and it is so much long lasting, like you talk about, uh, and it's generational, right? It's not just one generation, it keeps on, generation after generation keeps affecting it. So uh, it's such, like Rob Nixon talks about the concept of slow violence, right? There can be probably no better example of a slow violence than a radiation, in that sense. But okay, thank you. So we'll just move on quickly to probably at least one more poem. We're running pretty late already, so
Okay.
we'll go to one more poem. Do you want to choose another one of your favorites?
Well, if there's one more, then I guess let's read the last poem
Sure.
on page 14.
Is it is it this one? We live on, right?
Yes.
We live on. Yes,
Yes.
absolutely. So do you want
Okay.
to sort of briefly say what the topic is here? What's it
Well,
about?
I thought that as kind of a send off for
Yes.
the collection, I wanted to bring myself into it a little bit.
Yes.
um, just kind of talking about synthesizing the the history that I engaged with for this project and my own history as a descendant of African enslavement, and just kind of talking about what it means to have this generational cultural trauma and what it means to live on, essentially,
Right.
to what resilience can look like, and just and how it's okay to still be traumatized by
Mm-hmm.
this. It's okay to still have the the tendrils of the most painful events still affecting you and your
Right.
culture and your family.
Right. So I don't want to take too much space here. So I'll let you read it first before we maybe say a few
Okay.
words on it. Go ahead.
Okay. We live on. I am not of Bikinian heritage, but I am formed of those who left behind a coastline, empty, reeling, who laid in ships their suffering a fluid environment with dungeon darkness, the site of our captivity, the mediation of our culture's worth, and then a new shore where we would attempt to fasten new scraps into the image of traditions. We would succeed, despite the rumble down our spines that tells us wrong, that urges bodies into the ocean, that pulls us down or carries us home.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful. So, as you mentioned, there's an autobiographical element here, but it also brings together the Pacific and the Atlantic, right? Uh, the nuclear violence and also the Middle Passage and the history of it is very much in the spirit of Edward Glissant and his writings, right? In many ways, about the boat and the opacity and all that he writes about the history of African Americans into this continent. And so, yeah, I'm just curious, like, uh, I think you mentioned it already, about the sort of difficulties of comparison here, but it's not in the spirit of comparison or like value systems, but in the spirit of solidarities, right? How we can bring histories of violence and environmental risk together across different racial histories, right? In many ways.
Yes, I think that ultimately there is, it really detracts from all of our efforts for justice to
Right.
to to kind of have this like suffering Olympics sort of thing. Like, yes, it's important to acknowledge the nuances of every single culture's experience of colonization, imperialism, capitalism, poverty, everything, all the bad things. But it's solidarity is extremely important. Compassion is like the way, I think. I was just reading something from the new Jim Crow, and
Mm,
ultimately the a resounding thing at the end of the introduction of that book is that compassion is like the thing that needs to happen to break
right,
down mass incarceration as like one of the most oppressive evils in this country. And ultimately, I just wanted to build that bridge with the Bikinian people.
right,
And yes, I didn't even realize connecting the Atlantic to the Pacific, but that's really powerful.
right. Thank you so much. And it also ends obviously with the theme of living on, right? Survival and surviving. And sometimes that needs to be asserted, right? Is because there has been it colonialism in true sense is a project of erasure, right? So uh, against that, living on and sort of proudly displaying that living on is sort of one tactic of resistance in many ways, right? Uh,
Yes.
so in the sense that even though the Bikini Island is sort of bombed out of existence, but the people continue to live on, right? And they continue to keep their memories and uh, assert their survival, which we must recognize in many.
Yes. And I also, in my explanation paragraph that comes
Right.
after the poem, I say at the end that we all, living and spirit, demand an apology.
Yes.
And I think an important part of resistance and compassion and solidarity um, is like that all needs to be present, in my opinion, as
Right.
well as accountability from the institutions that have done the most damage.
Right. Right. Well, on that note, we will sort of get close to wrapping up. I just before we end it, we want to end with probably one final thing. Looking forward, so living on in that sense, and looking forward. Sasha, do you want to say a few words about what your plans are, when you plan to graduate, what your future research interests or like life interests, and how do you want to sort of carry forward your learnings from this class, from these interests at UCSB, and these topics and the learnings from this class? How do you want to sort of, how do you see yourself taking these things forward?
Yes, well, I will be graduating in the spring of 2024,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm currently engaged in a capstone project talking about sustained colonialism, to use a term coined by, I believe, Professor Kent Lightfoot at UC Berkeley. Sustained colonialism on the Kushaya Pomo and Coast Miwok lands, an area where I grew up in California, and kind of contextualizing that contemporarily with uh, the tourist industry, and the way that that is slowly pushing out a working class, and while at the same time exploiting working class labor. And that is something that I can see myself researching forever. That's something I'm extremely passionate about, especially seeing the changes where I've grown up and how that has personally affected me. And I think that there is definitely a space for talking about the infrastructure of tourism and
Right.
labor as energy
Right.
within my project.
Absolutely. So on that note, let us thank Sasha. Thank you so much, Sasha, for joining us, giving us so much of your time and speaking with us through the class about different aspects of the class and all the work. I really want to thank you, not just for today, but also for the extraordinary work that you did for the class and all the assignments that you took, absolutely to a different level, like more than we expected, and really made us feel validated in many ways about creating the class. Uh, and uh, and yeah, that's pretty much. I want to thank you and wish you all the best for all your future endeavors, and hope to be in touch with you. Right?
Yes, thank you so much for your time and energy. It was truly a pleasure taking your class, and I'm not just saying that sincerely. It was such a wonderful experience, and yes, I hope to stay in touch as well.
Thank you so much. So on that note, I'll stop the recording, and thank you to everyone for listening. Please explore Sasha's full works, and also please keep an eye out for all the great works that she's going to do in future, uh, uh, hopefully in the near future as well. Thank you so much.